You know that highly specific flavor of panic when you're driving on the highway?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right, and you zone out for just a second and you realize you've completely missed your exit.
And the GPS instantly shifts tone. Like the arrival time turns red, it adds 20 minutes to your trip, and your chest just physically tightens up.
Exactly. You feel this profound sense of failure just because you aren't exactly where that little digital line dictated you should be at that, precise millisecond.
It is a totally visceral reaction. I mean, we've basically outsourced our sense of progress to an external algorithm.
Right.
And when we deviate from its perfectly linear, perfectly mapped out route, our brain interprets that deviation as a crisis rather than just a detour.
Yeah. But scale that feeling up from a Tuesday afternoon commute to the span of an entire human life. When you look at the full, unpredictable arc of a century, applying that kind of rigid digital mapping makes absolutely no sense.
No, it really doesn't.
Yet we're all constantly navigating this psychological landscape where our internal GPS is just screaming that we are behind schedule.
And that internal screaming is deafening. It creates a chronic anxiety that completely obscures the actual terrain we're supposed to be navigating. We become so obsessed with the red numbers on the dashboard that we just stop looking out the windshield.
Exactly. So whether you are listening to this deep dive on a crowded train or maybe nervously prepping for a high-stakes board meeting or just trying to keep your head above water in a culture that worships speed, this conversation is designed to be a profound mental reset.
A much-needed one, honestly.
Truly. Today, we are pulling over. We are turning off that screaming internal GPS.
We're going to examine how we measure a successful life when the traditional, socially mandated timelines inevitably collapse.
The source material guiding us today is an essay by D.L. Dantes, who writes under the moniker The Resilient Philosopher. The piece is titled A Letter to My 100-Year-Old Self.
And I just want to note, this isn't some superficial thought experiment about gray hair or retirement accounts.
Right, not at all. Dantes is offering a really radical framework for rethinking the mechanics of success, impact, and endurance over a century.
He's asking us to measure the distance between who we are right now and who we genuinely hope to become, but to do so after stripping away all the artificial metrics we normally rely on to tell us if we're doing a good job.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to even begin building a meaningful future, Dantes argues we have to completely deconstruct the toxic, frantic way we measure the present.
We really do.
He points out something I've always thought of as the age 55 checkpoint. We essentially treat life like a rigid corporate Gantt chart we inherited from someone else's management structure.
Oh, the Gantt chart of life.
Yeah, your education, your career apex, homeownership, marriage, they're plotted as sequential dependencies. If a checkbox is missing at age 40, we process it as a fatal system error. But why do we panic so much if we miss these arbitrary milestones?
What's fascinating here is the sociological mechanism behind why we crave that Gantt chart. We don't cling to these rigid timelines because they're inherently true.
Right.
We cling to them because of cognitive ease. It is so much easier to follow a pre-written script that efface the terrifying void of writing your own.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Dantes categorizes this strict sequence of first education, then career, then accumulation, not as a biological law of life, but merely as a habit of thought. And it's repeated so often we mistake it for truth.
But wait, let me challenge that for a second. Are they really just habits of thought? I mean, these milestones exist for structural reasons. If I don't hit my career milestones, I literally cannot pay my mortgage.
Sure, yeah. Economic realities are very real.
Right, and biological clocks are real too. So isn't abandoning the timeline just, I don't know, a philosophical coping mechanism for people who are failing to keep up?
That is the exact friction Dantes is addressing. He isn't denying the reality of mortgages or biology. He's critiquing the psychological damage we endure when we equate our human worth with our speed of acquisition.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he has this powerful quote. He writes, "Some people confuse timing with wisdom, as if arriving early means arriving whole."
Wow. As if arriving early means arriving whole. That distinction between speed and wholeness is crucial.
It completely upends our modern speed-based hierarchy. I mean, we have built an entire culture around celebrating the 30 under 30 lists in these early-stage prodigies. We worship velocity.
We really do. It's everywhere.
But Dantes argues that arriving at a destination before you have the maturity, the endurance, or the psychological scaffolding to handle it, that is not a victory.
Right. If you achieve massive success at 25 but lack the self-awareness to sustain it, The success will basically crush you.
Exactly. The struggle and the delay are what actually build the structural integrity required to hold the weight of your ambitions.
So the delay isn't a failure to launch. The delay is the construction of the launch pad.
Precisely. If you are listening to this right now and currently agonizing over a career pivot or a delayed start or some path you abandoned, Dantes is suggesting you reframe that.
Stepping off that inherited project plan might be the first honest decision you've ever made.
Yeah, it's the terrifying but necessary transition from following a map to using a compass.
If we drop the Gantt chart, though, it creates a massive vacuum. I mean, if I am no longer measuring my progress by how fast I check off highly visible milestones, how am I supposed to evaluate my daily grinding efforts? Because human beings are biologically wired for feedback loops.
We are, and that brings us to the core of his philosophy, this concept of invisible work.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we live in an attention economy where if work doesn't produce an immediate, visible dopamine hit,
Like a viral post or a sudden promotion?
right, or a public award, we assume the effort was wasted. We demand immediate proof of existence.
Yeah, it's this externalization of value.
Exactly. If I put in 10 years of quiet, unrecognized effort to build a foundational skill, or if I spend years quietly mentoring someone without any public credit, modern culture essentially views that as tragic misallocation of personal capital.
Because modern culture measures impact by volume and speed, but Dantes measures impact by resonance and duration.
Oh, I like that. Resonance and duration.
He argues that real structural impact moves incredibly slowly, almost imperceptibly. It moves through your students, your readers, your children, and the unseen choices that strangers make differently years down the line just because of a standard you quietly set.
How does he advise we actually survive the psychological toll of that, though? Rewiring a brain to accept zero applause for a decade seems incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for most ambitious people.
Well, he uses two vivid images to bypass our need for immediate applause. The first is about shifting our definition of meaning entirely. He writes, "A drop of water is not lost because it disappears into the river. Its meaning is fulfilled because it joins something larger than itself."
So the meaning is in the contribution to the whole, not in standing alone and demanding to be recognized as an individual drop.
Exactly. And the second analogy deals with the timeline of growth. He compares human impact to the way roots settle into the earth.
The real labor happens beneath the surface.
Right. The most brutal, labor-intensive work of a tree's life happens entirely in the dark. It's breaking through compacted dirt, establishing a foundation, seeking water, all happening for years before anyone above ground ever sees a single branch.
I think we can even modernize that analogy. It's kind of like dark matter in astrophysics.
Oh, that's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, because you cannot see dark matter. It doesn't emit light, it doesn't reflect light, it offers absolutely no visible proof of its existence to a casual observer, yet its gravitational pull is the only thing keeping the entire galaxy from flying apart. That is what invisible work is.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The quiet, uncelebrated grind is the dark matter of human progress.
So directly to you, the listener, if you look around your life today and you cannot point to one dramatic, explosive moment that changed everything, do not misinterpret that as failure.
No, not at all.
If you are doing the work, your roots are still growing. Your dark matter is accumulating. When the visible results finally manifest, you will know the real labor was completed during all those quiet years when the audience was empty.
What makes this essay so compelling, though, is that Dantes doesn't just restrict this philosophy to individual lives.
He scales it up.
He scales the micro up to the macro. He takes this concept of slow, foundational root growth and applies it to evaluate the future of human society as a whole.
Let's explore that macro view, because when we imagine the year 2084, the year this theoretical 100-year-old self is reading the letter, our default cultural narrative is almost always written in the language of consumption.
Oh, entirely. Advanced planes, new gadgets.
Right. Advanced AI, synthetic biology, escaping the climate crisis by colonizing other planets. We imagine a sleek technological utopia. But isn't all of this technological advancement the very definition of human progress? I mean, technology cures diseases. It connects billions of people. That is progress.
It is the most seductive version of progress because, again, it is highly visible. A new rocket is visible. But Dantes counters this sharply by examining the reality of the decade between 2020 and 2030.
Which was a very turbulent time.
Very. And impartially speaking, he uses this era as a case study, noting that it was defined by disease, war, corporate greed, fragile systems, profound ideological confusion, and the struggle of ordinary citizens to just afford basic stability.
He is observing a period where the technology is arguably the best it has ever been in human history, yet the sociological baseline feels incredibly unstable.
Precisely. He points out that massive, fragile corporate institutions are rescued from their own greed because they're deemed too large to fail. Dantes' core argument here is that innovation without stewardship does not solve human problems. It merely magnifies the flaws already present in the human heart.
So if you give a profoundly flawed, deeply inequitable society a much faster engine, it just drives off the cliff with greater efficiency.
That is the exact danger. He asks whether our descendants will actually know how to live better, or if they will just know how to live faster. Will society value moral courage? Or will we remain trapped in the exact same tribal appetites, just equipped with algorithms and orbital weapons?
Right, the tools change, but the behavior doesn't.
Exactly. And he has this quote to emphasize the point. A civilization does not become greater because it can reach another planet. It becomes greater when it finally learns how to honor life on the one it already has.
That reframes the entire space race, doesn't it? Reaching Mars is an engineering problem. Honoring life on Earth is a moral problem, and we are systematically using our engineering triumphs to distract ourselves from our moral failures.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we use the future as a diversion. True societal progress does not happen automatically simply because the calendar pages turn. The passage of time does not inherently guarantee improvement.
It requires action.
Yes, Dantes insists that the future only gets better when people actively refuse to repeat what he calls moral laziness in a more modern form.
Moral laziness in a modern form. That is such a piercing critique. It's like hiding our lack of empathy behind a supply chain we can't see, or using historical precedent as an excuse to avoid dismantling a broken system today.
He observes that society frequently wears the past like a heavy coat, using how things have always been done as a justification to delay the difficult work of building something better.
So what does this all mean? If society is this deeply prone to moral laziness, and if we are constantly bombarded by shiny technological distractions that pull our attention away from the foundational rot, how does an individual actually maintain their endurance?
It's a daunting task over a 100-year timeline.
Yeah, how do you avoid just giving up and joining the sleepwalkers?
Dantes believes the ultimate defense mechanism lies entirely in the stewardship of our own minds. He views lifelong learning as an act of profound resistance.
But let's clarify his definition of learning here, because he isn't talking about the prestige economy of academia, right? Acquiring a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctorate is not about vanity metrics.
Not at all. He strips away the prestige. Degrees, books, deep study, these are not finish lines, and they're not trophies to signal your intelligence for applause. They are purely utilitarian tools.
Tools to better understand suffering, complex systems, and the heavy responsibility that comes with leadership.
Exactly. And he draws a fascinating distinction between physical decay and cognitive decay. Physical aging is just biology, right? It's an unavoidable tax we pay for time. But he identifies the greatest existential threat to a human being as mental surrender.
Mental surrender. That happens when a person simply decides they have learned enough.
Yes. They stop interrogating the world. They accept the inherited Gantt chart without question. They settle into a predictable demographic profile and become purely a consumer of life rather than a student of it.
He writes, to keep learning is to refuse the burial of the mind before the burial of the body.
It is a devastatingly beautiful line. It frames curiosity not as a hobby, but as a survival tactic.
If you think about the mechanics of our economy, the system desperately wants you to settle. By age 40, it wants your purchasing habits locked in, your political views calcified, and your ambitions narrowed.
It's just easier for the system that way.
Exactly. So refusing that burial of the mind, choosing to continually absorb new, contradictory, complex information makes you unpredictable. It is a daily rebellion against complacency.
This raises an important question for the listener. Are you living merely as a consumer of life or as an active student of it? The Resilient Philosopher title isn't about abstract academic musing. It's the rigorous discipline of remaining awake while the majority of the population is sleepwalking through their artificial deadlines.
It requires proving to yourself every single day that your aspiration can survive longer than your exhaustion.
And this requires immense grace for oneself. You cannot sustain a 100-year pursuit of wisdom if you are constantly punishing yourself for the winds that didn't blow in your favor.
That brings us to Dantes' beautiful synthesizing analogy about the sailor. He writes, "No sailor reaches his destination by grieving the wind he never had."
It perfectly encapsulates the futility of mourning the timeline.
We spend a staggering amount of our cognitive energy doing exactly that. We sit in the boat, staring angrily at the limp sails, itemizing the advantages we weren't born with, the macroeconomic timing that ruined our launch, the mentors we never found.
We mourn the timelines that were never truly ours, and in doing so, we ignore the forces that can still move us forward today.
While you're busy grieving the non existent wind, you're entirely blind to the current that could be pulling you forward right now.
The resilient philosopher focuses their attention strictly on what can still move them, refusing to validate the excuses that keep them anchored in place.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Building on Dantes' brief mention of society, using the past as an excuse to delay the future.
Think back to that opening feeling, the visceral panic of missing your exit on the highway, the crushing anxiety of falling behind society's schedule.
What if the absolute greatest gift you could give your 100-year-old self isn't a massive, highly visible achievement? What if it isn't a flawless execution of that inherited Gantt chart?
What if the gift is entirely internal?
What if the greatest gift is simply the radical act of forgiving yourself for the timeline you didn't meet today? Consider the sheer amount of psychological energy you spend carrying around the ghost of the success you were supposed to have already.
It's an exhausting burden to carry.
It really is. So if you stop carrying that ghost on your back, how much faster and how much more joyfully could you build the dark matter of the success that is actually waiting for you?
You cannot chart an authentic course for the next 50 years if your eyes are locked on the map of where you used to be.
You are allowed to reroute. The GPS doesn't control the destination. You are allowed to begin becoming right now, quietly beneath the surface. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Turn off the flashing red numbers, stay curious, and keep building. We'll see you next time.